October 25th, 1915. A canvas tent trembles in the wind near Petersfield, Manitoba. Inside, a child enters the world during harvest season, when the fields lie bare and the first frost threatens the stubble. His name is Thomas George Prince, Tommy, the 11th child of Henry and Arabella Prince, born into a lineage that stretches back through chiefs and treaty makers, through generations who knew this land before borders carved it into something called Canada. His great-great-grandfather, Chief Peguis, had led 200 Ojibwe people from Sault Ste. Marie to the shores of Lake Winnipeg in the 1790s, following the fur trade and the promise of open country. That same bloodline now pulsed through the infant, wrapped in wool blankets, his first breath drawn in a tent that offered little shelter from the Manitoba cold. The Brokenhead Reserve lay northeast of Winnipeg, a patchwork of forest and farmland, where the Prince family moved when Tommy turned 5. Here, in Scanterbury, the rhythms of life followed older patterns. His father, a hunter and trapper, moved through the woods with a silence that seemed almost supernatural. Tommy watched. He learned, while other children his age attended school reluctantly, dragging their feet through lessons about distant wars and foreign kings. Tommy disappeared into the bush every chance he got. The muskeg held tracks. The birch forests concealed deer trails. The marshes whispered with the movement of muskrat and beaver. His father taught him to read these signs the way other children learned to read books. At dawn, they would leave together, father and son, their boots crunching through snow or squelching through spring mud. Henry Prince carried a rifle across his back, its wood worn smooth by decades of use. Tommy carried nothing but his eyes and ears. "Watch the wind direction," his father would say. "Smell the air before you move. An animal knows you're coming long before you see it. The trick isn't speed, it's patience. It's becoming part of the landscape until the forest forgets you're a threat." Tommy absorbed these lessons like rainwater into parched earth. By the time he was 10, he could track a rabbit through underbrush so thick it seemed impenetrable. By 12, he could move through dry leaves without making a sound. At 14, he could judge distance to within 10 yards just by studying the way light fell through the canopy. But there were other lessons, too, darker ones, taught not in the forest, but in the brick building called Elkhorn Residential School. Tommy was torn from his family and forced into a system designed to strip away everything his father had taught him. The school had rules: English only, no traditional dress, no hunting, no mention of the old ways. Students who resisted were punished. Tommy resisted. He ran away twice during his first year, disappearing into the bush and navigating 40 miles back to Brokenhead, using only the stars and his memory of the land. Each time, they brought him back. Each time, the punishments grew harsher. But something in Tommy refused to break. He completed 8th grade and walked out of Elkhorn with his identity intact, though the scars remained invisible beneath his shirt. The Great Depression had settled over Canada like a fog that wouldn't lift. Jobs were scarce, money scarcer. Tommy worked whatever labor he could find. He felled trees in lumber camps, his arms growing thick with muscle as he swung an axe from dawn until the light died. He worked construction when he could get it, hauling bricks and mixing concrete until his hands were permanently stained with dust. But the forest called to him. On Sundays, his only day off, he would vanish into the woods with his rifle. Deer, moose, sometimes wolverine, those vicious predators that could tear through a leg-hold trap and keep running. Hunting wolverines taught a man patience. They were smart, cautious, and impossibly strong for their size. You had to outsmart them, outlast them, and when the moment came, your shot had to be perfect. There were no second chances. Tommy Prince became known throughout Brokenhead as the best shot on the reserve. Not the fastest, not the flashiest, but the most reliable. When Tommy aimed, the target fell, period. Old-timers who'd been hunting since before Tommy was born would shake their heads in respect. "That boy has the eye," they'd say. "Sees things the rest of us miss." At 300 yards, Tommy could put a bullet through a running deer's heart. At 500, he could drop a moose with a single clean shot to the brain. The rifle became an extension of his body, its weight familiar, its quirks memorized. He knew exactly how wind affected the bullet's path at different distances. He understood how temperature changed powder burn rates. These weren't things he learned from books. They were truths carved into his muscle memory through thousands of hours in the field. In his late teens, Tommy joined the Royal Canadian Army Cadets. Something about the uniform called to him. It represented structure, purpose, something larger than the grinding poverty of the Depression. He excelled immediately. Marksmanship competitions weren't competitions when Tommy Prince participated. They were formalities. Drill sergeants who'd trained hundreds of young men took notice. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that, Prince?" "The reserve," he'd answer simply. "Just the reserve." But it was more than that. It was generations of knowledge distilled into instinct. It was his father's patience, his grandfather's precision, his great-great-grandfather's understanding that survival depended on reading the world correctly. September 1939. Europe ignited. Poland fell in weeks. France would follow. Britain stood alone against a mechanized nightmare that had crushed everything in its path. Canada declared war. Tommy Prince, now 24 years old, walked into the recruitment office in Winnipeg. He met every physical requirement. His marksmanship scores were exceptional. His experience in harsh wilderness conditions was exactly what the Army needed. They rejected him. No explanation given, though the reason hung unspoken in the air, like smoke. Indigenous Canadians weren't wanted. Not officially, anyway. The recruiters looked at his dark skin and black hair and saw something other than a soldier. Tommy applied again. Rejected. He applied a third time. Rejected again. June 3, 1940. Someone, somewhere in the bureaucracy, finally relented. Tommy Prince enlisted in the Royal Canadian Engineers, assigned to the 1st Field Park Company. He was given a shovel, not a rifle. Sapper work, digging trenches, building bridges, important work, necessary work, but not the role Tommy had envisioned. He did it anyway. For 2 years he dug, he hauled, he followed orders. The uniform made him feel like a better man, he'd say later. But something was missing. He hadn't joined the army to dig holes. He joined to fight. In September 1942, a call went out for parachute volunteers. The 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion needed men. Not just any men. They wanted soldiers with exceptional physical conditioning, men who could endure brutal training and operate behind enemy lines. Tommy Prince volunteered immediately. The training nearly broke him. Not physically, that part was manageable, but the jumps. There's something fundamentally unnatural about stepping out of an aircraft at 1,500 feet. Every instinct screams at you to stay inside. The first time Tommy approached the open door, wind roaring past, the earth impossibly far below, his body locked up. The jumpmaster looked at him. "You going or staying, Prince?" Tommy closed his eyes, thought about the forest, about the moment before releasing an arrow, the commitment, the release. He stepped into nothing. Out of 100 recruits who started parachute training, only 9 earned their wings. Tommy Prince was one of them. Promoted to Lance Corporal, he returned to Canada briefly before receiving new orders. Classified. Confidential. Don't tell anyone where you're going or what you're doing. He boarded a train with blacked-out windows in late 1942. The destination was Helena, Montana. The mission was classified under the designation Project Plow. Only when he arrived did Tommy learn the truth. The Americans and Canadians were forming a joint special operations unit, elite, experimental, designed to operate in the most hostile terrain on Earth. They needed men who could ski, climb, fight hand-to-hand, survive on minimal rations, and kill silently in the dark. They called it the 1st Special Service Force. The Germans would call it something else. The Devil's Brigade. That's what German soldiers whispered to each other after the first encounters. Die Schwarzen Teufel, the Black Devils, because these commandos painted their faces with shoe polish before night raids, because they appeared from nowhere, killed with knives or piano wire or bare hands, and vanished before reinforcements arrived. Because among their ranks walked a man who moved like a ghost, a man who could cross enemy lines wearing moccasins, silent as snowfall, a man the Germans believed couldn't possibly be human. His name was Sergeant Tommy Prince. Before we continue with Tommy's story in Italy, I want to share something with you. If you're finding value in these real stories of Canadian farm boys who became legendary snipers, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to Canadian Farm Sniper Stories. Every week, I bring you new, deeply researched narratives about men like Tommy Prince, whose skills learned in the Manitoba wilderness became the difference between victory and defeat. Hit that subscribe button, and you'll never miss a story. Now, let's return to December 1943, when Tommy Prince was about to face Monte Maggio. The Italian mountains in winter are unforgiving. Monte Maggio and Monte la Difensa rose like twin fortresses anchoring the German defensive line. Snow clung to rock faces too steep for most men to climb. German positions dotted the peaks, machine gun nests dug into stone, mortars pre-sighted on every approach. The 1st Special Service Force had already taken Monte la Difensa in a night assault that became legendary. Scaling a cliff in darkness, attacking from an angle the Germans thought impossible. Now, Monte Maggio waited. Command assigned the objective to Tommy Prince's battalion. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Tom Gilday, had noticed something about Prince. The man had abilities that defied explanation. Prince would vanish on reconnaissance missions, sometimes for days. No radio contact, no signal, just gone. Then he'd reappear with intelligence so precise it seemed impossible. German bunker at grid coordinates 418-921. 12 men, 3 MG-42s, officer sleeping quarters on the north side, ammunition stored in the southeast corner, sentry rotation every 2 hours. "How did you get this information, Prince?" Gilday would ask. "I looked," Tommy would answer. "Just looked." But it was more than looking. Tommy Prince had learned something in the Manitoba wilderness that few soldiers possessed: the ability to become invisible, not through camouflage, but through understanding. He moved like prey, not predator. Prey never announces itself. Prey becomes part of the environment. Rabbits don't charge through underbrush. They freeze. They wait. They time their movement to coincide with wind or rain or the passage of clouds across the moon. Tommy applied these lessons to war. For Monte Maggio, Gilday gave Tommy an impossible assignment: scout the German positions, all of them. Chart their bunkers, their fields of fire, their weak points. Do it without being detected. If the Germans realize we're coming, hundreds of men will die in the assault. Tommy nodded, packed his gear, included a pair of traditional Ojibwe moccasins, soft-soled and silent. At dusk on a December evening, he disappeared into the mountain's shadow. German sentries stood at regular intervals, breath fogging in the cold. Tommy waited, watched their patterns, timed their movements. When the moon slipped behind clouds, he moved. Not quickly, slowly. A step, pause, listen. Another step, pause, listen. The moccasins made no sound on the frozen ground. His breathing matched the rhythm of the wind. He reached the first bunker at 0200 hours. Germans inside, 4 of them, playing cards by candlelight. Tommy could see them through a firing slit, could hear their laughter. One complained about the cold, another about the food. They had no idea a Canadian sergeant crouched less than 15 feet away, memorizing every detail. Sandbags stacked to 3 feet, wooden support beams showing signs of rot, single entrance facing southeast. He moved on. Another bunker, then another. By dawn, Tommy Prince had mapped the entire German defensive network, every position, every weakness. He descended the mountain as the sun rose, reappearing at Allied lines like a spirit materializing from mist. The assault on Monte Maggio launched 3 days later. The Devil's Brigade climbed in darkness, following the route Tommy had charted. They reached the summit without firing a single shot. The Germans, confident in their defenses, had placed minimal guards on the approach Tommy identified. When the attack came, it came from within their perimeter. Confusion, panic. German machine gunners turned their weapons around, firing at shadows. The sound of their own MG-42s echoed across the mountain. German reinforcements heard the distinctive rattle of their weapons and hesitated. Why were their own guns shooting? "Stop shooting at us," they shouted in German. "We're on your side." But the Devil's Brigade had captured those positions and now used German weapons against German soldiers. The psychological effect was devastating. The force held Montemajo for days against counterattacks. Tommy Prince didn't receive a medal for the operation. His work was too sensitive to acknowledge publicly. Revealing his methods would compromise future missions, but among the Devil's Brigade, his reputation solidified. If Prince scouts it, we can take it. That became the unspoken understanding. The Germans never figured out how the Allies consistently knew their positions. They blamed collaborators, executed civilians on suspicion of espionage, never suspected that a single man, wearing moccasins and moving like wind through grass, walked past their sentries night after night. February 1944. Anzio. The beachhead had become a killing ground. Allied forces pinned against the coast, German artillery raining down from the hills. Every movement drew fire. Casualties mounted daily. The Devil's Brigade needed intelligence, German gun positions, troop movements, anything that could break the stalemate. Volunteers were requested for a forward observation post. Silence. Men looked at their boots. Volunteering for OP duty at Anzio was volunteering to die. The Germans had every approach zeroed. Machine guns, mortars, artillery. Nothing survived in no man's land. Tommy Prince stepped forward. "I'll go." An abandoned farmhouse sat 1,400 meters forward of Allied lines, 200 meters from German positions, close enough to see German officers through binoculars, close enough to hear their conversations. Tommy volunteered to run a communications line to the farmhouse and establish an observation post. The line had to be buried, camouflaged, protected from shell fire. It took him 6 hours to lay it, crawling meter by meter, digging with his hands when the soil was soft enough, using a bayonet when it wasn't. German sentries passed within yards. He froze, became stone, became earth. They never saw him. For 3 days, Tommy Prince lived in that farmhouse. No resupply, no relief, just him, a field telephone, and binoculars. He reported German movements continuously, artillery positions, infantry rotations, supply convoys. The intelligence allowed Allied gunners to target German logistics with devastating accuracy. Then a shell severed the communications line. Tommy watched the wire dangle uselessly. The Germans began advancing toward the farmhouse. They'd realize it was occupied. They'd bring up tanks. He had 2 choices: retreat or fix the line. He chose a third option. In the farmhouse, Tommy found old civilian clothes, a worn shirt, patched trousers, a battered hat. He dressed like an Italian farmer and walked outside carrying a hoe. The Germans were 30 meters away. They watched him. Tommy ignored them, began working the field around the farmhouse, hoeing the frozen ground like he was preparing soil for spring planting. He moved slowly, methodically, like a man who'd done this work his entire life. The Germans saw an old farmer too stubborn to abandon his land. They saw poverty, desperation, harmlessness. They didn't see Sergeant Tommy Prince locating the break in the communications line. When he found it, Tommy knelt down, appeared to tie his boot. His hands moved beneath the laces, stripping wire insulation, twisting copper strands together, wrapping the connection with electrical tape he'd hidden in his pocket. 30 seconds. The repair complete. He stood, resumed hoeing, worked his way back to the farmhouse. The Germans never suspected. That night, he resumed transmitting intelligence. The ruse became legendary. When the story reached Allied command, they couldn't believe it. Prince did what? Walked into no man's land and fixed the wire while Germans watched? Gilday just nodded. That's Prince. He sees opportunities where other men see death. Tommy's work at Anzio earned him the Military Medal, one of only 3 Canadians to receive both it and the American Silver Star during World War II. The citation praised his exceptional bravery and dedication to duty, but the words couldn't capture the reality. Tommy Prince had spent 72 hours alone in no man's land, surrounded by enemies, and emerged with intelligence that changed the course of the battle. The Germans never learned his name. To them, he remained der Geist, the ghost. Some called him Teufel, the devil, A few refused to believe he was human at all. How else could you explain his ability to appear behind German lines, leave dead soldiers in his wake, and vanish before anyone could respond? If you're appreciating the depth of research that goes into each episode, consider subscribing to Canadian Farm Sniper Stories. These aren't Hollywood myths or exaggerated tall tales. These are documented historical accounts of men whose hunting skills became military legends. I pour hours into verifying every detail, every date, every location. Subscribe, and you'll get access to stories most history books overlook. Now, let's follow Tommy to southern France, where his most audacious mission awaited. June 4th, 1944. The Devil's Brigade led Allied forces into Rome. They were the first to enter the city, moving through streets lined with cheering civilians. For Tommy Prince, there was no celebration, no rest, no acknowledgement, just new orders. Operation Dragoon, southern France. The invasion would target the French Riviera, driving inland toward the Franco-Italian border. Tommy's battalion would hit the Hierro Islands first, then push east through mountainous terrain held by German reserves. Intelligence was minimal. Maps were outdated. Nobody knew where the German divisions were concentrated or how heavily they were fortified. Tommy Prince and a private were assigned reconnaissance. Find the German positions. Report back. Don't get captured. September 1st, 1944. Tommy and his partner moved through the Maritime Alps, traveling light. Minimal rations, no radio, just rifles, binoculars, and compasses. The terrain was brutal. Steep slopes, dense vegetation, ravines that dropped away into nothing. They covered 24 kilometers in the first day, moving parallel to German patrol routes, but never crossing them. At night, they didn't light fires, ate cold rations, slept in 2-hour shifts. On the second day, they located a German reserve battalion encamped near Les Garennes. Tommy counted tents, estimated troop strength at 600 men, observed artillery pieces being positioned, noted ammunition storage areas, mentally mapped the entire encampment. This information could turn the battle. They had to get it back to Allied lines. On the return journey, they heard gunfire, Germans engaging someone in the valley below. Tommy moved to a ridge and glassed the scene. French resistance fighters, partisans, outnumbered 3-1, pinned down by German infantry. The smart move was to bypass the fight, maintain operational security, get the intelligence back to command. Tommy looked at his partner, looked back at the valley, made a decision. He unstrapped his rifle, found a position with clear sight lines. Range approximately 400 yards. Wind negligible. Targets moving through open ground. He settled into his shooting position, the rifle stock pressed firmly into his shoulder. Breath control. Sight picture. Squeeze. The first German dropped before the sound reached his comrades. Tommy worked the bolt, acquired a second target, fired. Another man fell. The Germans scattered, trying to locate the shooter. Tommy shifted position slightly, fired again, and again. His partner joined in. 2 rifles. Precision fire. The Germans couldn't identify where the shots originated. Their platoon commander tried to organize a response. Tommy's bullet found him at 420 yards. The German line collapsed. They retreated in disorder, leaving their dead in the field. When Tommy descended to the partisan position, the French commander approached cautiously. He looked at Tommy, at his partner, looked behind them, searching for more soldiers. "Where is the rest of your company?" he asked in broken English. How many men were shooting? Tommy pointed to himself, then to his partner. "Just us," he said. The French commander's face went white. "We thought we were being rescued by 50 men. At least 50. The volume of fire, the precision. I counted 12 Germans hit before they ran. How is this possible?" Tommy didn't answer. What could he say? That he'd learned to shoot hunting wolverines in Manitoba? That his father taught him to read wind and distance before he learned to read books? That he'd spent his entire life preparing for this moment without knowing it? He just nodded politely and moved on. The partisans watched him disappear into the mountains, this ghost who'd appeared from nowhere, and saved them with a dozen shots. Tommy and his partner walked 70 kilometers over the next 3 days. No food, no water, except what they could find in streams. No sleep beyond brief, exhausted collapse in hidden positions. They navigated by stars and compass, avoiding German patrols, crossing terrain that would have killed less prepared men. When they finally stumbled into Allied lines on September 4th, they were skeletal, eyes sunken, uniforms torn, but the intelligence they carried was pristine, exact coordinates of the German Reserve Battalion, troop strength, artillery positions, defensive weaknesses. Command used the information immediately. On September 5th, the Devil's Brigade launched an assault on the encampment. They captured over 1,000 German prisoners in a single engagement. The enemy never knew what hit them. For his actions, Tommy Prince was awarded the Silver Star, America's third highest military decoration. The citation noted that his reconnaissance was so accurate, so detailed, that it ensured the complete success of the operation. Between December 1943 and September 1944, Sergeant Tommy Prince conducted reconnaissance missions that defied conventional military doctrine. The distances he traveled alone in enemy territory, the time he spent behind German lines without support, the precision of his intelligence, all of it was unprecedented. Military historians studying the Devil's Brigade later calculated that Tommy's confirmed kills exceeded 50 during this period, though the real number was likely higher. Many of his actions occurred in darkness, his targets falling silently with no witnesses except the other Germans who'd wake to find a dead man in their midst. Some mornings, German soldiers wouldn't find bodies. They'd find missing equipment, boots stolen right off sleeping men's feet, maps taken from officers' tents, food supplies sabotaged. The psychological warfare was as effective as the killing. The Germans developed a superstition about the Devil's Brigade. They believed the unit employed indigenous shamans who could transform into animals. They believed some of the commandos were spirits, impossible to kill because they weren't truly alive. This wasn't entirely wrong. Tommy Prince had learned his craft from a culture that understood something Western military doctrine didn't. Patience isn't weakness. Silence isn't absence. Invisibility isn't a trick. It's a discipline. It's understanding that the forest doesn't fear the rabbit because the rabbit doesn't announce itself. Tommy didn't announce himself. He moved through war zones the way he moved through Manitoba forests, with complete presence, complete awareness, and when the moment demanded it, complete precision. Before we reach the conclusion of Tommy's war service, I want to take a moment to thank you for listening this far. These stories matter. Men like Tommy Prince fought with incredible courage, but after the war, many were forgotten, their contributions overlooked, their sacrifices diminished. By subscribing to Canadian Farm Sniper Stories, you help keep their memories alive. You support the research that uncovers these narratives. Hit subscribe and be part of preserving this history for future generations. Now, let's talk about what happened after the war. December 1944. The 1st Special Service Force was disbanded. The war was winding down. Allied forces were pushing into Germany. The specialized commandos who'd operated in Italy and France were scattered among other units. Tommy Prince returned to Canada in June 1945, honorably discharged after 5 years of service. He was 29 years old. He carried 11 medals. He'd been wounded multiple times, though the physical scars were minor compared to the invisible ones. Post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't diagnosed in 1945. It wasn't discussed. Soldiers were expected to adjust, to move on, to be grateful they'd survived. Tommy tried. He started a cleaning business in Winnipeg. For a brief time, it prospered. He married Verna Sinclair. They had 5 children. He attended community meetings, advocated for Indigenous rights, pushed for changes to the Indian Act that had governed First Nations people since before Confederation. In 1946, Tommy was elected vice president of the Manitoba Indian Association. He traveled to Ottawa to testify before a parliamentary committee reviewing the Indian Act. He spoke about treaty rights, about the promises made by the Crown to his grandfather, Chief Henry Prince, during the negotiation of Treaty 1 in 1871, about the need to honor those commitments, to recognize Indigenous sovereignty, to abolish the paternalistic system that treated First Nations people as wards of the state. His testimony was powerful. His recommendations were visionary. The government made minor revisions to the act. Nothing fundamental changed. Tommy returned to Winnipeg disappointed, discovered his cleaning business had collapsed. The friends he'd entrusted it to had crashed the company truck and sold it for scrap. He was unemployed, his family struggling. The man who'd saved countless Allied lives couldn't find work in peacetime Canada. He took jobs in lumber camps, worked in a concrete factory. The arthritis in his knees, damage from years of harsh conditions during military service, made physical labor excruciating, but he endured. Then, Korea erupted. In August 1950, Tommy re-enlisted. The United Nations needed troops. Canada sent the 2nd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. Tommy Prince became a sergeant again. As soon as I put on my uniform, he said, I felt like a better man. Korea was different from Europe. The terrain, the tactics, the enemy. But Tommy's skills translated. He led snatch patrols, small units that infiltrated enemy territory, attacked isolated positions, captured prisoners, and withdrew before reinforcements arrived. His ability to move silently, to appear where enemies didn't expect resistance, remained undiminished. At the Battle of Kapyong in April 1951, Tommy Prince helped defend Hill 677 against overwhelming Chinese forces. The Patricias held the position against repeated assaults. For their actions, they received the U.S. Distinguished Unit Citation, the only Canadian unit ever honored with that award. Tommy served in Korea until 1953, returned to Canada, was honorably discharged. Again, civilian life proved harder than combat. His health deteriorated, the arthritis worsened, his marriage fell apart. His children were placed in foster homes. He battled alcoholism, self-medicating the psychological trauma that had no name and no treatment. In June 1955, newspapers reported that Tommy Prince saved a man from drowning at the Alexander Docks in Winnipeg. Even in his personal crisis, his instinct to help others remained intact. But he was losing the battle with his demons. By the 1970s, Tommy was homeless, living in a Salvation Army shelter. He'd sold his medals to survive, the same decorations that represented his service, his sacrifice, his valor, traded for food money. November 25, 1977. Tommy Prince died at the Deer Lodge Center in Winnipeg. He was 62 years old, broken, forgotten by the country he'd served, or so it seemed. His funeral proved otherwise. More than 500 people attended. Members of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry served as pallbearers. Manitoba's lieutenant governor was there. Consuls from France, Italy, and the United States attended to honor a man who'd helped liberate their nations. Warriors from the Brokenhead Ojibwe nation chanted the Death of a Warrior song as his casket was lowered into the earth at Brookside Cemetery. In death, Tommy Prince received the recognition that had eluded him in life. His legacy grew in the decades after his passing. Streets were named after him. Scholarships established in his honor. Military cadets studied his tactics. In 2002, the French government presented his family with an official certificate acknowledging his contributions to their freedom. In 2005, Heritage Canada produced a Heritage Minute about Tommy Prince, introducing his story to a new generation. In 2010, Canadian actor Adam Beach, himself Ojibwe, announced plans to portray Tommy in a biographical film. Tommy Prince became recognized as perhaps Canada's greatest soldier, the most decorated Indigenous Canadian in military history, a man whose skills, learned hunting on the Brokenhead Reserve, changed the course of battles and saved countless lives. But here's what the medals and monuments don't fully capture. Tommy Prince represented something larger than individual heroism. He carried forward a tradition of warriors that stretched back through generations. His great-great-grandfather, Chief Peguis, negotiated treaties with the Crown, believing in a future where indigenous and settler peoples could coexist with mutual respect. His grandfather, Chief Henry Prince, signed Treaty 1, securing hunting and fishing rights for his people. Tommy inherited that legacy, served with distinction, fought for his country, even when his country didn't fully embrace him. And when the war ended, he continued fighting, not with rifles or grenades, but with testimony and advocacy, pushing for indigenous rights, demanding the government honor its commitments. He saw the connections other people missed. The same nation that relied on indigenous warriors in wartime abandoned them in peacetime. The same government that praised his service as propaganda denied him basic dignity as a civilian. Tommy Prince's story isn't just about sniping Germans from 400 yards or running communications lines through no man's land. It's about the cost of service, the price of being exceptional in a society that wants you to be invisible, the trauma of watching brothers die in combat, and then returning to a country that treats your people as second-class citizens. Tommy Prince served. He bled. He won. And then he fell through the cracks of a system that had no place for an indigenous war hero who refused to disappear quietly. The wolverines he hunted as a young man in Manitoba were vicious, relentless predators. Surviving them required not just skill, but endurance, the ability to outlast something that wanted to destroy you. Tommy Prince spent his entire life outlasting systems, prejudices, and conflicts designed to break him. He survived residential schools. He survived the Depression. He survived the Devil's Brigade. He survived Korea. What he couldn't survive was peacetime neglect. Today, when Canadian Special Forces train, they study Tommy Prince, his reconnaissance methods, his patience, his ability to gather intelligence in hostile territory without being detected. When they discuss the foundations of modern special operations, Tommy's name appears alongside more famous figures. He pioneered techniques that are still taught. His understanding that the best warrior isn't the most aggressive, but the most invisible. That lesson lives on. The moccasins he carried in his pack, those soft-soled footwear that allowed him to walk past German sentries, they've become a symbol. Indigenous warriors serving Canada didn't just bring bravery. They brought knowledge systems developed over thousands of years, ways of moving through terrain, ways of reading landscapes, ways of becoming part of the environment rather than dominating it. Thank you for staying with me through Tommy Prince's story. If you found this valuable, if you believe these narratives deserve to be told and retold, please subscribe to Canadian Farm Sniper Stories. Your subscription helps fund the research, the fact-checking, the hours spent in archives, ensuring every detail is accurate. These men deserve to be remembered correctly. Subscribe and join me in honoring their legacy. There are more stories waiting, more farm boys who became legends, more Canadian warriors whose skills changed history. Tommy Prince was born in a tent, died in a care facility. Between those moments, he lived with an intensity most people never experience. He moved through Italian mountains like a ghost, walked into French valleys, and saved partisans from annihilation, fixed communications lines while enemies watched, unknowing, earned the respect of the Devil's Brigade, the most elite fighting unit of World War II, advocated for his people when recognition would have been easier, struggled when peace proved harder than war, and left behind a legacy that transcends his personal suffering. His great-great-grandfather, Chief Peguis, welcomed settlers to Manitoba in the 1790s, believing cooperation was possible. Tommy Prince proved that belief correct through his service, even when the nation he served failed to honor him. The fields around Brokenhead Reserve still look much as they did when Tommy was a boy. The forests still hold deer and bear. The marshes still whisper with muskrat. If you stand quietly in those woods, early in the morning when frost covers the ground and your breath fogs in the air, you can almost feel what Tommy felt. The patience of the hunter, the awareness of being part of something larger than yourself, the understanding that true strength isn't violence, it's precision. It's knowing when to move and when to wait. It's becoming invisible, not through deception, but through belonging so completely to the landscape that the landscape itself protects you. Tommy Prince carried those lessons from Manitoba to Italy, from France to Korea. They kept him alive through hundreds of missions. They made him a legend. They defined his life. Sergeant Tommy Prince, Military Medal, Silver Star, Most Decorated Indigenous Canadian Soldier, member of the Devil's Brigade, reconnaissance sergeant who walked through enemy territory like wind through grass, farm boy who became a ghost, warrior who outlasted Wolverines and Germans and prejudice and poverty, advocate who fought for treaty rights until his health failed, husband, father, survivor, hero, and, above all, Ojibwe, part of a lineage that stretches back through Chief Peguis, through the Saulteaux migration, through generations of hunters and warriors and leaders, who understood that true power comes not from dominance, but from balance, from seeing what others miss, from moving when others freeze, from shooting when others hesitate. When the historians write about World War II, they often focus on generals and politics, on massive campaigns and strategic decisions. They discuss Normandy and Stalingrad, the Battle of Britain, and the Pacific Island campaigns. Tommy Prince appears as a footnote if he appears at all, but the men who served alongside him, the soldiers of the Devil's Brigade, they tell a different story. They talk about the sergeant who could scout German positions and return with intelligence so detailed it seemed impossible, about the sniper who picked off targets at ranges other men couldn't imagine, about the reconnaissance specialist who saved hundreds of lives through patience and precision, about the ghost who haunted German nightmares and French memories and Canadian history. They talk about Tommy Prince, and when they do, their voices carry a weight that no medal can match. The weight of knowing they survived because he existed, because he served, because he refused to accept that anything was impossible. Not climbing Monte Majo in darkness, not fixing a telephone wire under German observation, not walking 70 kilometers without food or water, not outlasting a war that killed millions. Tommy's story ends where it began, in Manitoba, in soil that his ancestors walked for generations, before borders divided the land into provinces and reserves. He's buried at Brookside Cemetery in Winnipeg, not far from the Brokenhead Reserve where he learned to hunt. His grave receives visitors, veterans, historians, family members, people who want to say thank you to a man who never expected thanks, who served because it was right, not because it was rewarded, who fought for a country that failed him because he believed in something larger than personal grievance. He believed in duty, in honor, in the promise that sacrifice matters, even when the world forgets. Thank you for listening to Tommy Prince's story. Subscribe to Canadian Farm Sniper Stories to hear more narratives about the men who learned their skills in Canadian wilderness and used them to change the course of history. These stories matter. These men matter. And their legacy deserves to live beyond gravestones and forgotten records. Until next time, remember that the greatest warriors aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the silent ones, the patient ones, the ones who learned from the land itself how to move, how to wait, and when the moment arrives, how to act with perfect precision. That was Tommy Prince. That is his gift to us, not just his service, but his example. Subscribe, share this story, and help ensure that Canada's Indigenous warriors receive the recognition they've always deserved.